Hello everyone, I am Arobinda sarker, course BSc in Prosthetics and Orthotics, Bangladesh Health Professional Institute. Today I am going to talk about gait analysis, kinematics angulation of each locomotor units in each gait phases and goal of phases. So first of all, we have to know about what is gait cycle. The gait cycle refers to the time it takes for one foot to touch the ground, then lift off and finally touch the ground again. It is a repetitive pattern that occurs during walking. Now let's talk about phases of gait cycle. There are mainly two phases of gait cycle. Number 1, stance phase, and number 2, swing phase. In stance phase, there are 5 sub-phases. These are initial contact, loading response, mid-stance, terminal stance, and pre-swing. In swing phase, there are 3 sub-phases. These are initial swing, mid-swing, and terminal swing. Now, I am going to analyze my own kinematics angulation of each locomotor units in each gait phases, and I will also mention the normal angulation value. So let's start. In initial contact phase, my hip joint angulation is 16.3 degree flexion, 7.7 degree knee flexion, and 10.4 degree ankle plantar flexion. In loading response, my hip joint angulation is 4.4 degree flexion, knee joint is 4.3 degree flexion, and ankle joint is 20.8 degree plantar flexion. In mid-stance phase, the hip joint angulation is 1.9 degree extension, knee joint angulation is 3.3 degree flexion, and ankle joint is 16.1 degree plantar flexion. In terminal stance phase, hip joint is in 10.9 degree extension, knee 19.7 degree flexion, and ankle 0.4 degree plantar flexion. Here, the hip joint is 6.6 degree flexion, knee 45.2 degree flexion, and ankle 9.5 degree plantar flexion. In initial swing, the hip joint angulation is 12.5 degree flexion, knee joint is 54.8 degree flexion, and ankle joint is 5.9 degree plantar flexion. In mid-swing, the hip joint is 16.6 degree flexion, knee joint is 28.7 degree flexion, and ankle joint is 7.9 degree plantar flexion. In terminal swing phase, the hip joint is 8.4 degree flexion, knee joint in 1 degree flexion, and ankle joint in 15.8 degree plantar flexion. Now, I am going to talk about movement in each gait phases. In initial contact phase, the ground reaction force is going posterior to the ankle joint and creating plantar flexion moment, and going anterior to the knee joint and creating extension moment, and going anterior to the hip joint and creating flexion moment. In loading response phase, the ground reaction force is going posterior to the ankle joint and creating plantar flexion moment, going posterior to the knee joint and creating flexion moment, and going anterior to the hip joint and creating flexion moment. In mid-stance phase, the ground reaction force is going anterior to the ankle joint and creating dorsiflexion moment, anterior to the knee joint and creating extension moment, and posterior to the hip joint and creating extension moment. In terminal stance, the ground reaction force is going anterior to the ankle joint and creating dorsiflexion moment, anterior to the knee joint creating extension moment, and posterior to the hip joint creating extension moment. In pre-swing phase, the ground reaction force is going anterior to the ankle joint creating dorsiflexion moment, posterior to the knee joint, creating flexion moment, and posterior to the hip joint, creating extension moment. Now let's watch the muscle action. In this image, we can see the actions of muscles in each gait phases. The muscles are gluteus medius, quadriceps femoris, tibialis anterior, triceps surae, and hamstring. The more deeper colors are indicating the highly activation of muscles, and the paler colors are indicating low activation of muscles, and the white colors are indicating there is no action of muscles. The stance phase is about 60% of the gait cycle. In initial contact, goal is to begin stance with heel strike. Loading response is to absorb shock and weight bear. Mid stance is to progress over a stable foot. Terminal stance is to prepare for limb advancement, and pre-swing, the goal is to position the foot for push-off. Swing phase is about 40% of the gait cycle. Initial swing, the goal is to lift the foot off the ground. Mid-swing, the goal is to advance the limb forward, and the terminal swing, the goal is to complete limb advancement and prepare for initial contact. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching the video.